Hi everyone, thank you for joining us tonight to a special presentation by Tom Kosnik on finding co-founder and team for early stage startup. First, I'd like to welcome Jocelyn Tan, who's the chair for IEEE Young Professionals, and for her to give you an overview as well as speaker introduction.
Thanks, Wenbo. Again, I'm Jocelyn Tan. I'm the co-chair of IEEE Young Professionals of Santa Clara Valley. And welcome to our August Startup Interest Group event. I'd like to introduce the sponsors of tonight's event, so IEEE Young Professionals and Startup Interest Group of Santa Clara Valley. The focus of IEEE Young Professionals is to provide social, technical, and networking events for professionals who have graduated within the last 15 years. Some of our notable events included an artificial intelligence symposium and startup pitch competitions, as well as happy hours. Feel free to follow us on Meetup or visit our website. We have a few upcoming events. One is the SIBR and government grants for startups, talking about how to obtain grants and funding. That will be held in September. We also have a virtual startup pitch competition focused on COVID-19 solutions in October. And we have an NATEA event on impacts of trade and pandemic on high-tech industry in November. And more details about the exact times and dates will be coming out shortly. I'm also the CEO and founder of CCVR, who is also a sponsor for tonight's event. Our mission is to create a workplace where professionals are empowered to bring their best selves to work every day. The product is anti-harassment training through virtual reality. And key features include that you can play multiple perspectives such as complainant, observer, or offender based on real cases, and being able to play an immersive environment in VR. Also, we have a cutting edge framework and ethics that can help users improve their behavior over time. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce to you tonight's speaker, Dr. Tom Kosnik. Of all the experts I know who know how to build winning teams, Tom struck me as having the most relatable, practical, and empathy-focused approach. I was inspired by his work and experience to show for this expertise that I couldn't wait to have him share them with you. Tom has a stellar academic and professional repertoire, including being a past professor at Harvard and Stanford and National University of Singapore. He also earned his PhD at Stanford School of Business. He is currently a VC at FoundersX Ventures, a firm focused on investing in enterprise AI and big data, among others. Tom is also a co-founder of Gear Up, Test Your Business Model Potential, and Plan Your Path to Success. He has also been advising countless tech startups, including my own, CCVR. So please welcome Dr. Tom Kosnik.
Thank you very much, Jocelyn. Wenbo and Joseph, is it now time for me to start?
Please, go ahead.
All right, so I'm sharing the screen. And I'd like to start by thanking Joseph, Wenbo, and Jocelyn for inviting me to this event, and to thank all of you who are coming. It's my great pleasure to be able to do this with you tonight. Okay, I'm not going to spend much time on my background. Let's just say I graduated from Duke in 1972. I did some stuff. I came to Stanford in 1990 to get a PhD. Taught at Harvard, came back to Stanford in came to Stanford in 1980 to get a PhD. Taught at Harvard, came back to Stanford. Taught at Stanford from 1990 to 2018. The big companies are below the line in terms of companies that I've worked with. And the things above the line are mostly academic institutions plus a few other things. Basically, things like 500 Startups and UNoodle are platforms to enable entrepreneurship around the world, right? So I'm a very big believer that we shouldn't be too focused on Silicon Valley, and especially that we should think about Pacific Rim, because there are amazing entrepreneurs that are either in China or born there, in Singapore, Vietnam, Thailand, Japan, Korea, many very interesting entrepreneurial companies coming from those communities. And it's been my pleasure to visit China and Singapore many, many times in the last few years. The reason we're doing the talk tonight about finding a co-founder and building a team is that the number 3 reasons that startups fail is that you don't have the right team. I've seen other research that says, conflict between the co-founders that leads somebody to leave and the others to be left to figure out what to do is the number 2 reason for failed startups after having no market need. So it's a big problem, and one that luckily we have tools that can be used to help reduce the risk that you pick the wrong teammate or build a team that's not very useful. This is our agenda for what we're going to be going through tonight. And you can read fast and I can talk, plus we'll come back to it before each of the sections, but that's where we're headed. First, vision. And the idea here is to try to find, if you're looking for a co-founder, try to find one whose vision is aligned with your own. And the vision could be how you see the future and the opportunities for your new venture. It can also be a vision that encompasses where in the world you want to be, who are the target customers that you want to have an impact on, what is the social impact that you want to have. So a vision is, in a sense, you're stepping back and taking the long view of what you'd like to accomplish, both personally and professionally. And you can see the 3 arrows are in the bullseye. This is 3 co-founders who are aligned. And I've seen plenty of startups with co-founders whose visions are not aligned and they wind up going out of business, like the target with the arrows missing it on the right. As an example, I'm going to share my vision and 4 objectives with you. And I share this with people that I'm either going to start something with, or people I might invest in, or people that I will do a project with. And the first is simply to promote peace on the Pacific Rim. The second is to help women level the playing field, because all of us know that women are not given the same equal advantage that men have in any of the countries around the world. But if we give them help in leveling the playing field, everybody is better off, men and female, men and women alike. The third is to mentor the next generation of leaders. It's been my pleasure, both through my teaching and also through being on boards of advisors and as an investor, to work with amazing young people, right? I'm in the baby boomer generation, and so I've mentored a lot of people in the succeeding generations who I think are smarter than ours and have done less damage than ours, and hopefully will undo the damage that the baby boomers have wrought on the world. Finally, I love to snorkel along with my wife, Jill, and so something I can't do as much with, but trying to do things to reduce global warming, which will help the coral reefs, is my last of the 4. And I share that with people, and I say, you don't have to have the same vision that I do or the same objectives. I'd like to know yours. And are there any areas, say, of mine that you are in disagreement with, or that you can't work with, or that you're curious about? And similarly, if you share your vision with me, I may have questions for you, because the visions don't have to be identical. They just have to be aligned and complementary. So you and a co-founder don't necessarily have to have the exact same vision, but hopefully your visions will combine in a great way. Once you've got, and by the way, how do you come up with a vision? What I did until I got mine was every day I'd set a few minutes aside and I'd just be quiet and ask my little voice, why am I here? What am I supposed to do? What kind of, why am I on Earth? And I got some answers to that in 1990 that have really kept me focused from then until now. So you can partly use that kind of technique to find your vision by doing meditation or just being quiet and asking your little voice what's going on. You can also talk to other people. By learning about their visions, you may discover something that you didn't realize you were crazy about that you really are interested in working on. Okay, the next topic is skin in the game. And in order for founders to be successful, they have to think about these things when they're starting out. because a lot of times companies get started and they don't clarify this stuff and it gets messy later on. So the first is to identify what are the roles and responsibilities of each of us as founders. Is one of us going to be the CEO or the chief technology officer? Who's going to do product management or sales? And there are other roles as well, human resources, finance, and so on. But understanding among the founders who does what, and also understanding if you have a gap. For example, maybe you are all engineers and you don't have anybody who's had sales experience. You say, that's a hole in our lineup. So we want to, as we go forward, try to find someone who's aligned with us who can join the team who's really good at selling. The next thing you have to think about is how do we get the founders and everybody else really focused on staying with the business, because we don't have cash for salaries. And so what we do with startups is to give equity or ownership. A stock option is not stock outright. So you with a stock option, you gradually earn over a 4-year period the option to buy stock at a very low price. And when it says 4-year vesting and 1-year cliff, it simply means that your options will vest over a total of 4 years, a little bit each month. And a 1-year cliff means if you leave before the first year is over, you don't get anything. And that's to keep people who leave early from having, rewards for something they didn't help with. The next idea is, well, how should we divide up the ownership of the company? Often if there are two co-founders, they say, well, let's go 50-50, that's easiest. But actually, that's rarely the right answer. Even if there are only 2 co-founders, you have to think about what are our roles and responsibilities, because it may be that one of you has a more senior role or more senior responsibility, so you should get more stock. It may be that in the early days, somebody can actually go full-time and others are working part-time because they have to keep their jobs to keep their salaries. And so the full-time person should get more options. Sometimes co-founders will each contribute a little bit cash to the venture. So if somebody puts in $1,000, somebody puts in $5,000, then the person who puts in 5,000 should get more options than the one who puts in 1,000. And finally, sometimes founders will bring intellectual property that they've created somewhere else, and they'll say, I'm going to bring this to the venture and I'm going to put it in. So that now the venture's IP, not mine. And if someone does that, they should also get stock options for that. The other thing to remember is that when you're carving up the company, set aside at least 20% for future employees, because you're going to need stock options to attract people that you can't pay market rates for when you get them to join. The other part of the skin in the game is to decide whether any of the co-founders have intellectual property already, and will they agree to give that intellectual property to the company. Because once they do, it's not theirs anymore, it belongs to the company, and they'd have to license it from the company if they left. Next, you should have a paragraph or 2 about how do you remove a co-founder who's not performing? Or what do you do if a co-founder leaves early? What are the plans for, especially dealing with the stock that you all are sharing if something like that happens? Then there is usually a paragraph or 2 around dissolution or termination. Dissolution means the company's bankrupt, we're going to go out of business. And termination can also mean we're ending the company. It can also mean that we're ending one of the co-founders' role in the company. We're firing that co-founder. There should be paragraphs on how you're going to resolve disputes. For example, you may use arbitration instead of going to court. It may also be if you have to think about, well, what laws would govern this if we had a dispute, and typically it would be the laws in the state that you're in. So in this case, you'd have California law for dispute resolution, even though you'd use Delaware law to incorporate the company. Then you need to think about who's on the board of directors. And often it's only the co-founders until investors come. And then usually some of the co-founders have to step off the board of directors to make room for the investors. So once you have, especially venture capitalists investing in the company, typically your board of directors is 5, 2 co-founders, 2 investors, and 1 person who's typically a CEO who's been in at least one startup in an industry like yours, so that that CEO can actually help you to govern your business in a better way. And the key thing here is, as a co-founder, you want to make a list of people that you'd like to invite to join your board of directors, so that if you're invested in by a couple of venture capitalists, they're going to say, okay, who's the 5th member of the board? And if you say, gee, I don't know, they're going to say, well, here, we have a list of people that we think you should consider. And that list will all be people that they have funded before that are basically going to vote with the investors against you if there's a dispute. So if you come up with your own list, you can often get the investors to agree to one of your choices for an outside director, which means you have a better idea of what kind of advice you're going to get, and you have a better chance of having that director vote with you if you have to disagree with the investors in a board of directors decision. After the board of directors, there's something called board of advisors. And this is something that is very important and widely overlooked by a lot of founders. Board of advisors can be anything from 4 people to, I've been on a board of advisors, actually had 25 people on it for a company called Saba Corporation that did very well. But anyway, with the board of advisors, you want to have people who have complementary expertise that will help you as you grow the business. So there might be somebody who's expert at going global, might be somebody else that's really good at sales. If you're engineers, it might be somebody else that's good at raising money if you haven't done that. And these advisors will typically ask for between 0.25% of common stock, again in options, just like the founders. And if a board of advisors member is like really important, you might give them as much as 1%. But typically you try to keep that percent that the advisors get is the same across all the advisors so they're not jealous of each other. So again, 0.25% is considered a fair amount of stock for somebody to join the board. Next comment topic is about diversity. This is something very near and dear to me because I know for sure that if you have a diverse team, you're going to be more successful than if you don't. What do I say if a couple of white boys come to me and say, hey, Tom, will you join our board of advisors? I say, no. They say, why not? I say, because you're 2 white boys. And what you need to do is add at least 1 and preferably 2 women with complementary skills to yours and from a country that's different from yours. Same thing would happen if there were 2 Chinese men or 2 Vietnamese men or whatever. 2 males from the same country are going to have lots of blind spots, and adding females will improve the profitability and reduce the cash consumption. It will also help you to go global in a better way. So the main reasons for me to encourage you to have a diverse group of founders, or if you start out with just 2 founders, and the 3rd person, 4th person are not founders, but they're going to be very senior, just make sure they're different from you. And we do that because first, there's a lot of research that shows that if you have both men and women in senior leadership, you'll be more profitable and use less capital. If you have diverse founders, it's easier to recruit and retain better talent. There's research that shows that women are less likely to join a company that has only men in the top 5 or 10 people in the company. And it's also true that if you're not Caucasian American, you're going to be skeptical of joining a company that has what I call white boys at the top. So the teams will be better running the business, and they'll be much more successful as you go global. Next idea is complementary skills. And these 2 slides are skills that I actually put together for a research program called Designing Systems that Summon the Spirit. And there are a lot of words on these slides. I'm not going to go through all of them because we're going to give you the ability to have a copy of the deck if you would like it after we're done. I think the main thing is we divide into tangible skills and intangible skills. In intangible, you have things like, can I build an alliance with another company? Do I really know, for example, does somebody in the group knows how to do social media marketing so that we can have proper marketing of our company? How good are we at speaking and listening? So if we have to pitch to investors, we can do a good job with that. How are our design skills? If you have a founding team that has, say, an electrical engineer and a salesperson on it, probably neither one of you knows enough about design to be useful. So finding somebody who actually has expertise in what we call UI UX design is really important as you grow the company. And then there are things like industry knowledge. If you're going to go into enterprise kinds of applications and you know that there are going to be companies that are in the retail sector that need to adopt your product early, finding somebody either on the founding team or on the board of advisors who knows something about retail is really important. And then you typically will know by where people went to school and the work that they've been doing, whether they have technical expertise as an engineer, or maybe they have sales or marketing or accounting or finance expertise based on what they've done. And no matter who the founder is, you have to have enough technological know-how to understand and appreciate when the engineers and the scientists and the technologists are explaining how the product works. There's nothing worse than a founder who, even if he or she doesn't have an engineering degree, if you have a founder who basically can't understand what people are talking about if they talk about the product, that founder is not going to be effective as a leader. The next slide talks about intangible skills. And you can see that these things are things you can't easily measure, but they're things that I think if you think of the people around you and people you admire, you say, what do they know how to do? And you go down this list, you'll say, oh, this person who I really admire has a great sense of humor and helps people to be at ease by using that sense of humor. It doesn't mean that the person's making jokes. It means that that person enjoys humor as part of how to get a group to work more effectively together. Having founders and senior leaders who, even if they're from one country, are comfortable working across different cultures and different languages is really important, because again, you're going to become a global company before all is said and done, and that's important. So creativity is important. Grace under pressure is when everything's going crazy and things are wrong, instead of going, oh no, what are we gonna do? That founder can say, let's step back. You know, I'm sure we can figure out a way to get out of this trouble that we're in. So that grace under pressure is really important. Tenacity in the face of adversity. Most people will tell you if you're a founder that you're crazy. You shouldn't do the startup. You should get a good job and, you know, do something less risky. And what you have to do is be willing to push forward in the face of that disbelief that you can do something well. But you also have to be open-minded enough that as you're pushing forward, if it's not working very well, and if somebody on your board of advisors or a mentor says, you know, you might want to consider pivoting in this direction, maybe you change the product a little, or maybe you change the target segment a little bit, that you're able to take that advice and follow it. You're flexible enough to do that, but you don't change plans every time somebody tells you that you should be doing something different. So that tenacity, flexibility is really important. Increasingly these days, people talk about empathy and the fact that most leaders don't have it, and the fact that it's crucial if you're going to be effective as a leader in your company, as somebody building partnerships, as somebody who understands customers. And empathy is simply the ability to put yourself in someone else's shoes and understand why they're thinking the way they're thinking, why they feel the way that they feel, why they're taking the position they're taking. And it's a very practical skill, and one that you can actually learn if you don't have it in a very serious way as you're getting started. Part of learning it is to actually take on somebody who has great empathy as a mentor, but you can also read books about it, you can watch videos about it, and so on. So it's a learnable skill. Integrity goes without saying. If you tell lies, if you don't deliver on your commitments, neither your co-founders, nor your employees, nor your customers, nor your partners are going to believe in you and be willing to support you. And the last item I have is spiritual awareness and fitness. Not everybody, certainly not everybody practices religion. Some people say there's no such thing as spirits. All that I would say is, even if you don't believe in something called spirits, if you, every once in a while, ask your little voice, what should I do now? You have this brilliance inside of you that if you give it some time to tell you what it would like to tell you, it will give you insights that you won't have if you constantly stay busy and don't listen to your inner self. So those are highlights of the skills that I think somebody on the team ought to be good at each of these, or you know which ones you lack and you look for people to join the team who are really good at those skills. The next item is complementary co-founder profiles as opposed to conflicting. And you can see the two pictures here. The one on top right is supposed to be two co-founders that are complementary. and the one on the bottom is two co-founders that are arguing. And so they've got some sort of conflict going on. Personality is a really big thing, and you can actually measure and learn about your personalities using a tool called the Myers-Briggs instrument, or that costs money to do. So the URL that I've given you has a clone of the Myers-Briggs inventory that is very accurate, and really you'll get the same scores with that as you would with the Myers-Briggs. So if you haven't ever heard of this personality, it's not a test, it's a profiler, then what I would say is go to that URL, fill out the questions and find out what yours is, and then get a couple of friends to do the same thing and compare notes. Because in fact, you don't have to have the same personalities to be effective. It's better if you don't. In other words, having slightly different personalities in the same venture make it easier for you as a team to communicate with other people that are not thinking and making decisions the same way that you are. So Myers-Briggs or the clones at Human Metrics are a really good thing that I would encourage you to do. The second is to think about how you live and how you work. I used to be an early bird. Used to get up at 5 in the morning and loved it. And after my wife retired, Jill retired, she used to get up at 5 in the morning. Then she started getting up at 10 and 11. And I wound up staying up later. And I think I've gone from early bird to night owl. But whatever you are, there's no right answer. But you have to think about, if one of us wants to get to the office at 8 a.m. and leave at 5, and the other one wants to get in at 11 a.m. and leave in the evening, or even work all night, it doesn't mean you can't do that, but you've got to build in a system that allows early birds and night owls to effectively work together. Clean versus clutter. Most of the people I know that are founders are clutter people, but if you are clean, and if you've got a clean co-founder, somebody who's like having a really clear desk and a clear mind, if you have nothing but clutter, you're going to drive that person crazy. So for the clutterers among us, find ways to clean up every once in a while. And for those who have a perfectly clean desk, please be patient, because those of us who clutter need your help to get better. Noisy versus quiet. There are people who can be in their cube with a television on, or with their laptop watching YouTube with the sound on very loud volume, and it's driving other people crazy. So build something into the environment where you work that if you have somebody who needs a quiet place, it can be everything from giving them headphones that cancel out the sound, to having some rules about not letting things be too noisy. Or you can have, for example, rooms that you can shut the door and the sound doesn't travel through it. So the people who want to be noisy go there. Or if you want to have a meeting, you go there and you leave the other workspaces for the people who want to work quietly. There are people who love to argue in order to reach a decision. And then there are people who hate arguing and don't like conflict at all. And you have to understand which of those two styles you prefer, and to realize neither is better, but you're going to have to learn how to work. If you're somebody who likes conflict, if you have people on the team who really don't like it, you have to find ways to tone down that conflict, and to let them know that if you've gone too far, they can just say, stop. You're too aggressive about this. Similarly, if you're someone who wants no conflict at all, you can ask the people who like to use argument and aggressiveness to get to a better answer. You can say, I'm not comfortable with that. Can you explain why you're doing it? So in a sense, both different styles can learn more about the other so that you can effectively use the combination in a startup. I would say a culture that doesn't have both, early birds and night owls, clean and clutter, noisy, quiet, constructive conflict, and compromise. As your company grows, if you cannot accommodate all of those combinations, you're going to be limited. So you need to build a culture that can honor all of those different preferences. Finally, there are personal differences: single, married, divorced, different religions, straight or gay, or LGBTQ. Some who say, I'm going to work 80 hours a week, and either I don't have family or my family will deal with it. Or there are people who say, no, I'm a parent with 2 children. I want to be able to have dinner with my kids, so we have to find a way to do that. And then remember, I told you I was baby boomer. There are generational differences. And there's certainly differences in the way that men and women look at things and make decisions. And there are differences based on, were you born and lived in the USA most of your life? Were you born in China or Korea or France or Germany or Sweden or Mexico? And the thing that can make a company really resilient and really flexible is to, as you get people from different generations, genders, and cultures into the company, you have them share with others how their generation, gender, and culture deals with certain issues or decisions. So you can actually expand your ability to lead and negotiate and sell and communicate across this triple chasm of generation, gender, and culture by asking people in your company or on your board of advisors how they do it, given that they're different generations, genders, or cultures from you. The next topic is co-founder relationships. A lot of investors don't like having family members in the same founding team, whether that be husband, wife, brother, sister, boyfriend, girlfriend, parent, child. And the investors that don't like that have these reasons. It may be that the family comes first and the venture may suffer. It may be that you're going to give the best jobs to your nephews and your brother-in-law and so on, instead of to people who may join the business that are not in the family. It may be that if somebody on that founding team, say you're married and your husband is fired by the VCs, then the wife may not be very happy. Same thing, if the wife is fired, then the husband's not going to be very happy either. So investors are worried about what happens if a married couple are, or any of the other relationships are co-founders. And finally, we have employee morale, because people who are not members of the family might say they can't get ahead if they're not in the family. And if they do that, they'll leave, or they won't join in the first place. So you have to think about, that doesn't mean a husband and wife can't be in the same company. It just means either find investors who think that's really great, or also realize that this whole idea of resisting family relationships in founders it's not even across the whole United States. There are certain investors in the United States who feel that way. There are other investors in the US who say it's fine. And there are examples of co-founders that are family members that have done really well. Also, in a lot of other countries, not only is it not a bad thing for family members to be in the same business, it's expected. Some of the most successful large global companies in the world are family businesses. They don't come out of the United States, but they come out of countries in Asia, China, and some out of Latin America as well. So I think the caveat here is, when you decide who's going to be in the founding and leadership team, if you're going to have family members, just be aware that there are certain investors and certain other potential mentors, for example, who may have an issue, and that's okay. Just avoid them and go with people who are happy to work with you as you are. Let's think about our networks. And here I just have one slide. This is my network. Not my whole network, but these are the people that I work most closely with out of my Facebook network of almost 5,000 and my LinkedIn network of 13,000 plus. And as you look at the faces on this slide, I'd like you to ask yourself, how would you describe them? What adjectives would you use to describe these people? And you can also say, well, what kind of biases does Tom have, given who he's picked in his network? Right? And if you think about what I said my mission and goals were, you can probably understand why my network looks like this. I show you this not to have you have a network that looks like this, but to ask you to very explicitly say, there are people that I want to stay in touch with, that I want to have in my network that are not just casual acquaintances, but people that I'll help if they need help, and people will help me if I need their help as well. And then to explicitly say to them, hey, you're important to me. I'd like to really have us have a special relationship where we're in each other's network, helping each other. And if you do that, and then as a way to keep yourself honest, start to build your own slide and start to add the faces of the people who've agreed that they'll be part of your network, your close network, and then see if those faces mirror your goals, your vision, and your biases, or whether there's something else going on And then if you do have let's say a network that looks like mine does, you have to have a good story to tell. For example, you have to have a good story to tell white men about why your network looks like this, right? Because there are more women than men, and there are more people from non-Caucasian than Caucasian. So there's no special way to have your network. It should be aligned with your goals, values, and vision. But you should make sure that people who you really care about in your network know you care, and that you have a way that you can help them at times that they need help. Let's think about going global. This is a framework that I developed with two of my co-founders at GearUp, and I'm going to use our slide with examples to describe it. So if you're in a small country like Singapore or Sweden, you may have to go global early because most of your customers are outside your country. You might have to go global if you have large companies that are your enterprise customers and they want you to go global. For example, I had Microsoft, when I was doing some research and consulting with them in the mid-90s, was being told by their largest customers, you need to be more global because you don't have Microsoft employees in some of the countries that we have operations. So you could have larger customers push you to go global earlier. It may be that you start a company with founders that really want to have a global company. Certainly, GearUp Ventures, the three of us really wanted to have that kind of company. Applied Materials is another example. The people who started that company said, we want to be global, and we're going to have a bunch of procedures, policies, practices that will encourage employees and partners and customers to understand that's what we're going to do. If you're going to go global, you have to think about what sort of skills you have. Some of that has to do with different people on the founding team have different language skills, but regardless of language, you have to have people on the founding team who really understand what it takes to go from one country to another and to negotiate and sell and lead across cultural boundaries. Sometimes you start out actually as a global company because you may have very talented and less expensive software engineers or engineers of whatever type in China or India or Eastern Europe than you can have in the United States. You may start out with a company that's born global, if you will. The next reason you might want to do it is to enter other countries before your competitors get there. And Microsoft did this in Europe at a time that they were number 2 in spreadsheets and number 2 in word processing. They entered Europe before Lotus Development Corporation did, so they became the market leaders in Europe and then later used that leadership position to come back to the United States. Replicability is a fancy word for saying, hey, you can get advantages if you're in the kind of business that the bigger you grow and the more you make, the cheaper it is to make it. These kind of industries are typically things that are capital intensive, like semiconductors or automobiles, and replicability is not an issue if you're doing software in many of the other kinds of companies that don't require a lot of capital. And a learning curve, right? That changes. The thousandth car that's made on that assembly line costs less than the first, and the millionth car costs less than the thousandth. And you may want to do it to diversify in case your home market has a recession or depression, to be able to be in some other countries that are not on the same economic cycle as you are. Now, I will tell you that diversification is less possible now than it was 20 or 30 years ago because so many of our country markets are aligned because, because there are so many companies, especially in the digital arena, that have global operations, so that the recession that happens in one country is much more likely to affect other countries as well. Now, the reason these stars are here is the way you use this particular tool is you get together with your co-founders and say, what is going on with our business? Because for GearUp, it was a global consulting firm based on a book that we had published. The only thing that didn't say to go global was this idea of arbitrage. And everything else said, let's go global, and global we are. But there are companies in countries that do not need to go global early if you're in a big country and you don't want to go. So the way to think about where to go global once you realize that you're going to have to do it is to think about specifically what countries and what cities. So what I'd like you to do is jot down on a piece of paper or type into your device, whatever you're using, what the cities are that if you were going to start a company, the cities you'd most like to expand to. Now, once you've done that, after this particular program is over, I'd encourage you to go out and say, hey, these are cities that I would like to make sure I'm able to do business in the course of my career. What are your top 10? And it turns out, and you can do top 5 if you don't want to do 10, but the idea of comparing cities where you'd like to work is a very easy way to meet new people. It's not like saying, well, who are you dating, or are you married, or a lot of other things that are much too personal. And you can learn a lot by doing it. Because if you compare top cities, you'll find people who are either have family in the cities that you want to enter, or may have business operations in those cities, and they can help you to enter those cities that you don't currently have a market. So as an example, I'm going to give you my top 50. And the way that you get onto my list and into the top 10 is fit with my mission and funding. So you may remember back at the very beginning of the presentation, I said that one of my objectives in my mission is to promote peace on the Pacific Rim. So if you look at the names of the cities here, you'll see that almost all those cities are on Pacific Rim, and there are more cities in China than there are in the United States. And the few cities that are not on the Pacific Rim have people in them that help me get to the Pacific Rim. I don't think you need 50 cities. I've been in business for a very long time, and this has been a way that I can say, I'm not going to get to all 50, but I have a way of understanding what priority certain cities are in. And so, for example, Copenhagen used to be in the top 10, but when the revenues from that city went down, then it dropped out of the top 10, right? So you'd think about your city should not just be where you want to go. They should be aligned with your vision and mission, but you have to figure out how to make money in those cities as well. Once you decide that you're going to go global, in each of these new cities you go into, you have to think about what are the cultural chasms that I face because I don't really understand doing business in that country. And I think of myself as a little dog in the cheerleader outfit on the left of my screen, I guess the right of yours. And he's saying, yay, let's get together. I want to enter your country. But the little dog doesn't know how to do it. Meanwhile, the cat from that country is saying, why should I help you? I'm doing just fine. And they will look at you and say, well, do you know our language, our laws, our business ecosystem, the way government acts here, our education system, our religions may be different from yours. Our culture is certainly different. The way that we think about ethics and business is probably different. Circles of influence means it's a concept that means the players in a city, the stakes, which are the things you want the players to bet on you, and the code or provincial code, which is the way you build trust in that city. So you do need to think about, because this culture chasm is going to be different between cities, even between cities in the same country. Using an example, Silicon Valley has a very different culture from New York City or Boston or Dallas. And from my experience in China, Chengdu has a very different culture from Beijing, or Shanghai, and Beijing and Shanghai don't have the same culture either. So you need to think about this by city and find people who can help you gain the skills to navigate those cultural chasms. Next is access to capital. A lot of ways to raise money. One is to do what we call crowdsourcing. So this is where people will give you money for a chance to either get a first copy of your product, or they may even do it with GoFundMe. They actually do it and get a stake in your business. I'm not going to go into detail here, just to say you don't have to give away equity. In the early days, you can actually get people to pay you by Kickstarter, Indiegogo, or causes in order to have a chance to have your product early rather than later. There are lots of accelerators. These are just the ones that I am most familiar with in the Silicon Valley. You also have angel investors. These are individuals who invest their own capital in startups. They will often join the board of advisors, and they'll help the startup to meet customers, to meet other investors, and so on. And you may never need to go past angel investors. if your business can make money through customers, then you don't have to do venture capital. If you have to go into venture capital, these firms are the ones that are the best known in Silicon Valley. You see I have Band of Angels here as well. But what's happened is lots of new competitors have come into the Valley. Andreessen Horowitz a few years ago, 500 Startups, which likes to go global. And then all of these new ventures, many of them were founded by partners in the more established VC firms who wanted to have a smaller fund and be able to invest earlier. So I guess the reason I'm bringing all this up is if you decide you need to go after venture capital, you have to look at the different firms on their website. You have to understand who the partners are. You have to understand which areas that firm is investing in, and try to find firms that care about your industry and that where you can find partners that you say, I'd love to have him or her on my board of directors. Another way to get capital, instead of going to the venture capital community, is through what we call corporate venture capital. And these are large companies like Google Ventures, Intel Capital, GE Ventures that will invest the same thing as venture capital into a company, but they're less interested in how profitable you become. They're more interested because you have kind of technology or capability that complements them in their overall global network. And often these companies that invest in you early may be companies that could acquire you later on if you wanted to do that. Last is social impact. And the way people think about social impact in the first instance is to say, besides making money, which is economic impact, what else do we want to do? Do we want to help people in the communities? That would be called social. Do we want to help the planet with things like global warming or water pollution or whatever? That would be what we'd call environmental impact. And most companies these days try to think about, are we going to be a single bottom line, a double bottom line, or a triple bottom line? I would encourage you to think triple bottom line because particularly with the world going the way it's gone, I think you have to do more than just make money. Now, I'm just giving you some examples of very large charities to get you thinking about, if you don't know what causes you really care about, by looking at other causes that have been very successful around the world, it may give you some ideas, right? I mean, I have that cause for peace in the Pacific Rim. I have another one to save the coral reefs. I have another one to help women level the playing field. Those are my causes. I don't give any money to these nonprofits, and I don't encourage you to have to give money to them as well. I'd say, go to them, see what their mission is, see what their impact is, and get an idea how you and your co-founders could have an impact in your own company. The United Nations has Sustainable Development Goals, and I'm including this because I'm going to show you how my mission, vision, and values that I showed you earlier links to theirs. So I relate to gender equality, affordable and clean energy, and quality education through my top 4, right? I also am focused on things that have to do with life below water, peace, justice, and strong institutions, which would be peace on the Pacific Rim, and climate action for the coral reefs. So what I would encourage you to do as co-founders is look at the UN 17 goals and say, hey, is there one of those or are there 2 of those that we would really like to address with our business, with the products that we make and the channels that we use? And so thank you very much for being part of this with me. I know that it's hard to build teams. It's hard to find co-founders. And it's even harder if you're actually born global, where you have co-founders and their team divided across countries, which is much more common these days than it was 20 years ago. I hope these tools and insights will help you and other global entrepreneurs that you meet scale your businesses anywhere in the world. And with that, I'll say thank you. Time for Q&A.
Thank you very much, Tom. Yeah, we have some questions in the Q&A. You want me to go through them, or can you look it up?
I'm looking at them. Let's see. So the first question is, can younger co-founders get more than 50% because it's solely their idea? The answer is yes. But I think no founder is going to want to have 100% for very long, right? So the idea here is you may think you want more than 50% because then you'll control the business, but it turns out that ownership and control are 2 different things. So what you want as you think about other co-founders to join you is, I need enough equity to allow me to be a serious player, you know, when we have board meetings to decide where the company's going to go. But you don't have to have 51% in order to have a lot of leadership power. But as a younger co-founder, you can get more than 50. But if you go up for outside funding, that will get diluted, you know, with each subsequent round. What equity should you give to the 5th member of the board of directors? That's a great question. I don't have the answer on the tip of my tongue, but my best guess is it would be no more than 2 or 3% of common stock. It might be as little as 1% of common stock in stock options, right? So if you co-founders are giving yourself options, you'd offer that 5th member 1, 2, or 3%. The other thing is, you can ask attorneys who put these things together what their experience has been. You can also ask, if you wind up with investors that are investing in the business, you can say to them, well, typically, what do you guys see the 5th member of the board getting? And they can give you additional advice. So I don't think there's one answer, but certainly you don't give them 5 or 10% of the business, unless they suddenly are putting money in as well as advice. Okay, there are a few online tools to find co-founders like Founders to Be and Founders Lab. I don't have an opinion about any of them, okay, because I don't use them, but I would say it would be worth going to try them out and see what you can find, especially if you're finding difficulty finding like-minded people in your own immediate environment. But I can't tell you which I think is better than others, unfortunately. You've encouraged me to go out and look at them and see what I can find out. My biggest failures, well, the second company that I started was a biotech startup called, see, I've even forgotten the name, but it basically, Avocor was the name of it. And suffice to say, all my experience had been in software. I got talked into becoming the co-founder and CEO of this biotech company, even though I didn't know anything about it. And the company did very poorly, partly because they had a guy who's one of the leading shareholders and co-founder who was CEO till we found somebody else. And the investors said, this is stupid. So what I would say I learned from that was not to go way away from my area of expertise and passion when I started a company. I did have another failure just recently. I started something called Global Entrepreneurial Leaders Institute with a Chinese female who's, I could be your uncle, let's say there's a big generation, gender, and culture divide. The reason that the company failed was not our differences. It was because we were trying to find a market where parents would spend $5,000 to $10,000 per kid to have us work with their kids to get them ready to go to a university of their choice. And the problem there was not co-founder conflict, it was the market wasn't big enough. So I learned that from that. Can you give a successful example of balancing economic impact, social and environmental impact? No. So I'm just trying to think. So Tesla has a double bottom line, but not triple, right? Because they get accused of not taking very good care of their employees, but they do environment and profit pretty well. It's a great question. So who's done triple really well? The Gates Foundation, even though it's a nonprofit, does that amazingly well. So think about looking at the Gates Foundation as a nonprofit who has probably more social impact than any of the for-profit companies that I know that are in that business. Okay, and I did not see Black Americans, South Asians, and Africans in your network. Did you have an unpleasant experience, or you're just friendly to Asian women? So it's been in a sense, my disadvantage because of my focus on Asia, right, Pacific Rim, that I have met very, very few people that are either from Africa or African Americans, and very few people from Latin America. I've actually tried to correct that recently. So I've done a number of things to try to help founders that are African-American. But so the blind spot there is because I've been focused on Asia, and the fact that there are more women than men and more Asian women than Caucasian women in that network slide is because I've been very focused on Asia. And most of those Asian women are either investors or founders of companies, and I have helped them one way or another, and they've helped me back. South Asian is a very interesting question. Because I'm very focused on what I'll call Pacific Rim, which says China, Singapore especially, I've had lots of opportunities to go into India and some to Pakistan. I have lots of friends, colleagues, and founders in my network and investors that are South Asian that are awesome. But I've never been to South Asia because what I say is a week that I spend, say, in Delhi, I should have been in Beijing. So it's a matter of opportunity cost. But you're very discerning to see what was missing from my network. Excellent. Okay, appreciate the insight. And folks, usually mentioned good practice founders said, yeah, 20% for future employees. How do you recommend stock options be distributed to hired employers at that amount? So great question. It depends. So typically, if you only set aside 20%, you're not going to be able to give stock options to everybody in the whole company. And so you take that 20%, and if you needed a VP of sales, you might give the VP of sales more than you give the VP of human resources. But typically you're giving those stock options away to what I would describe as probably the top 20 or 30 people in your business. And I think no one of them should get more than 4 or 5%, even though certainly they'll ask for 10 or 15. But what you want to do is, of that 20%, you want to save enough that you could distribute it among at least 10 people without everybody being upset that they only got 0.25%. Now, that said, there are companies that give every single employee stock options. And that is something you can do, and it's something that I think is really interesting and cool. It's just that not all companies do it. But I think if I were going to start a company, I would give stock options to everybody. Alternative sources to find deep tech co-founders in quantum space and AI. What I typically would recommend is there are lots of virtual conferences and pitch competitions and all that are in each of these areas. And I would encourage you to go, even as an observer. Say you don't have a company yet and you're not an investor, but you want to learn more about quantum, you can go to these sessions where quantum ventures are pitching and they're getting advice from the judges, or there may just be like virtual conferences that are focused on those things. So I would do virtual conferences and startup pitches when we can actually go to the same place at the same time. Occasionally going to a conference that you're physically present at would be really great. I don't know what the right conference would be physically for quantum or space. There are several for AI.
So Tom, maybe I can put
yeah.
put a plug for IEEE. So IEEE is puts out a lot of conferences, and now they are virtual conferences. And then also locally, we have what we call sections. So within a section, in Santa Clara Valley, it covers anywhere from like Burlingame all the way down to San Jose. So we have what we call technical chapters. So, and they always hold very good speaking events. So such as this one event, such as yourself, this one is focused on startup, but you can look into various technical chapters in the Santa Clara Valley view or other wherever your local location to look for IEEE events. And I think you'll find some very good talents and also some very good potential co-founders. So just to share with you, I mean, when I had an incubator before, I sourced a couple company founders through the IEEE meetings. One of the things is that because I already knew them for several years, in their related work and also through the networking and coming to the IEEE meeting. So from an investor standpoint also is a plus. So I don't really have to vet a lot more because I already know some of these founders in the background.
That's great. Thank you, Joseph. Let's see. Should I go back to the questions? Joseph? I may have lost him. Window, should I go back to, how many people are left?
We have about five or six questions left.
You know, I have the questions. I mean, is there anybody left in the audience to?
Yeah, we have about 44 people, 44 people in the audience.
Thanks to all of you for staying so long. Okay, there's a question about a list of angel networks. I have an Excel spreadsheet that has the names of angel investors. I don't know very many of them personally, but I mean, if you were to link to me on LinkedIn and say, can you give me the spreadsheet that has those names, I could do that. I have a deeper list of venture capitalists than I do of angels. Very comprehensive list of cities you want to go. But what is the reason for some of the small cities like Dalian and Chengdu? Well, those are both cities in China, which is part of that Pacific Rim focus. And they're both cities that have paid me to go there or to do business. So remember, I said, you get into the top 10 through fit with my mission and funding. And so those two cities are there because the funding was there. They're also really nice cities, by the way. How do you pitch to a stranger you know from LinkedIn who has a technical expertise to build? So what you're saying is there's a stranger on LinkedIn that has a technical expertise. You might want to try to get him to become your deep tech co-founder. And what I would say is don't rush it. If you know that there's somebody that you'd really like to get to know, see if you have any common LinkedIn connections. And don't just ask one of them to introduce you. Get as many of them that know you pretty well, that say that they know that person reasonably well, to say, you know, let's say if your name was Tom Kosnik, you'd say, Tom Kosnik is really interested in meeting you. Would you be willing to do that? He thinks you've got great expertise. So you do that to get your first meeting, and then you ask him or her, what are they trying to accomplish? What are their goals? What do they see ahead of them in the next 2 to 5 years? And after you know that, then you talk to them about, you know, I'm thinking about starting a business, and here's what I'm thinking about that. You'd be an ideal technical co-founder. You know, would you consider it, or what would it take for you to become interested in a venture like this? So get multiple introductions if you can, and get to know them and what they want before you tell them what you want from them. Do I have more hope for Gen Ys or Gen Xers when it comes to fixing the messes created by boomers? Ethan, honestly, it's going to take both Ys and Xers together to undo the damage that we have caused. And in a sense, if you think about the generational difference, it will take longer for the well, you didn't talk about Gen Z either. And I think you ought to talk about all three. But in a sense, Gen Ys are already in leadership positions, and Gen X's, some of them are already there and they're going. So what I try to do is have like what I call a diagonal slice, where I know people in each of those generations who can work together to fix messes and to help startups and do things of that nature. But I don't think, so my answer is, it's not one generation that's better than the other. In fact, X, Y, and Z ought to work together to try to fix what the boomers have done. Okay, next from Brett. How do other founders and investors respond to you being so direct in building a network, reflective of Asian and women? I love the comment about white boy founders, wondering how that plays there. So I know a lot of white boy founders. And what I say to them is, look, I love white boy founders. It's just my mission is, you guys don't need my help. You got plenty of help from other white boys. And so, for example, I gave you the example that if two white boys came to me and said, will you join our board of advisors? And I say, no, unless you get women from another country. And usually I'll say Asian women because of my interest. I would say 60% of them say, screw you, and leave. And 40% of them say, well, why do you want to do that? And then I explain to them, and then they go and get it done. So my focus is not particularly popular, and I don't care. I don't care, because it is my mission and my focus. And I think the key thing is to communicate respect for people that are not in my target segment. So because again, I have a lot of really cool white guys that have helped me along the way and who I will help from time to time. And they know that it's not that I'm prejudiced against them. It's just that I'm focused on these other areas. And sometimes they'll help me, interestingly enough. reaching me for 5-10 minutes of quick advice, you have to get past Jocelyn and Joseph and Winbo, or at least 2 of the 3, before I'll take a meeting or do the, and then do the LinkedIn thing as well and get multiple people to recommend you. And also, what happens if somebody comes to me on LinkedIn and says, I want to talk to you about whatever. I have a 1-pager on how I pick projects, and I just attach that and send it back to them and say, see where you fit. I've made any measurements on how entrepreneurs have actually corrected market failures. So no, not in a systematic way. Not in a systematic way. I know, sort of, if you think about using anecdotal evidence, what I would say is, if the market failure is because there are no customers anywhere that really want what your technology has offered to them, then this idea of agile product development and customer development, where you're asking lots of customers what it is that they need, can get you to maneuver away from a market segment that doesn't care about your innovation to one that may. So in terms of a measurement, I do ask founders, even before they've failed or succeeded, how many customers have they interviewed? What have they learned from that? How many channel partners have they spoken with? What have they learned from that? Because if they do that enough, I know that they're less likely to have a market failure. And so the people, once a market fails, if they're willing to sort of change direction, do some more research, and follow the advice from people who may understand why the market failed in the first place, are more likely to be successful than those who say, I started this company, I worked on it for 2 years, it failed, I'm done, I'm not going to be a founder anymore. Most entrepreneurs fail at least 2 or 3 times in their career, and they may only have 1 success for those 2 or 3 failures. So you'll learn a lot from failures. And another way to think about measurements, when somebody's failed, I say, well, what did you learn from that? And depending on how insightful and thoughtful their answers are about what they learned from the failure, you can make a much better judgment on whether to invest in them, even though they failed. Best approach to use crowdfunding sites, I would say, make sure that you have people, whatever the site is, whether it be Kickstarter, Indiegogo, or whatever, get some people to be willing to, once you put the project on the crowdfunding site, that they'll go in and put money in so that you can get at least 20% of the 100% that you want to get from the crowdfunding site put in the first day or 2 from people that you've already gotten agreement from. The different crowdfunding sites have slightly different ways of operating. I happen to prefer Indiegogo to Kickstarter for reasons that I don't even remember enough to go into now, but I would say the key thing on crowdfunding sites is to get some people to agree to put money in the very first day that you put your project on the site. Skin in the game, do you recommend using a lawyer, attorney, draft founder agreement? Yes, I do recommend that a lawyer, the lawyer can give you a template, and then you can say, well, wait a minute, I want to add some things. Or you could even make a list of roles and responsibilities. But I do think you ought to get the advice of a lawyer in terms of founder agreement to make sure that the right language is there. And a good lawyer can help you do exactly what you want to do if you have ideas of roles and responsibilities. Now, something that many people don't know is that most lawyers have to give 10 or 20% of their time to something that's called pro bono work. Pro bono means you work for free. And so the idea here is, if you want to find a lawyer who might be willing to work for free for you for a while, I would go to the law firms that are, there's some very large ones, and then there's some boutiques that are very active in Silicon Valley over here, but that would be active in whatever city you're in. And I have my founders go to the sites of at least 3 law firms, find at least 3 or 4 lawyers in each of those law firms that they think would be a good fit with their company. and understand why. Maybe it's industry expertise, maybe it's something else. And then after they've done that, I can go, let's say I know somebody in the law firm that's not the lawyer that they want to meet. Once they've done their homework, I can say that these founders have done their homework. They'd really like to meet so-and-so to see if that lawyer would be willing to work pro bono for a while to see if this company is worth investing in. Some of the larger law firms also will give you a package that's worth between $25,000 and $50,000 that they'll work for free unless you get funded. And once you get funded, you give them the money that they didn't charge you. But if you don't get funded, they risk their time and they're fine with that. What sparked your interest in loving the playing field for women leadership? And when did you develop diversity and inclusion? So I was 12 years old, first of 5 children. My mom was a very liberated woman in her day. And I had been happily setting the table. And she said, Tom, you're 12, it's time for you to start doing dishes. I said, no, I don't want to. She said, why not? And I stupidly said, because doing dishes is women's work. And she looked at me and she said, you're going to do dishes every night from now at 12 years old till you go to college when you'll be 18. And as you're doing the dishes every night, I want you to remember 2 things. Number 1, there's no such thing as women's work. And number 2, women are smarter than men. And you can imagine, I did the dishes every night until I went to college. And she'd come in and say, what are the 2? And I'd say the 2 things. So that was pretty well burned in by the time I was 16, I think. And I also, so then I was interested in it, but then when I went for my MBA program, it was the first time that we had students that were kind of raising their hand and giving answers and questions and so on. And it became very clear to me there that my women fellow students were really good, right? And there were a number of them that would be really fun to work with and really smart. And so that part, so the female part of that came from there. I think in terms, certainly anything that has to do with Asia and America was burned in when I was kindergarten through 3rd grade, because we moved to Hawaii. It was one of the only white families in a neighborhood that was mainly Asian, right? So Chinese, Japanese, Filipino, Vietnamese, and so on. And those children brought me into their homes with their moms and dads, and they were very kind to me. And they were very good friends of mine. And so I had a sense of how good it is to have people in your network that are different from you. So that when I was very young, I got exposed to that kind of diversity. I didn't really know anything to speak of about African Americans until my sophomore year in college, when I went to work on a farm in Aquasco, Maryland. The guy who managed the farm took me in for 25 cents an hour. 50 cents an hour during the tobacco cutting season. And I was the only white kid in the entire workforce. And there were about 20 or so, I was a teenager, and there were 20 or so African-American teenagers who also worked with me. And they were very kind to me and took care of me, and I learned about them. So that, in a sense, really understanding African-Americans came because I was the minority and they took good care of me. I don't know a lot about, or I didn't know a lot about Latin Americans, Hispanic Americans. I'm very interested in that. And that came much later. That came, I would say, in my 50s. And I realized that South America was also on the Pacific Rim. And so I agreed to go there to a couple of countries to help teach entrepreneurship. And I was amazed at how amazing people were there. But again, in my circle of friends, when I went up through Catholic school, there were very few, I can't even remember any Hispanic Americans. There were a few African Americans who I was in grade school and high school with, but not many. So great question. I hope I answered it. And so the Diversity Initiative officially started in 1990 because I got a mission. And so if I got enough, I have enough time, right? Because it's an let's see if I can tell this story.
Yeah, we're good to 8:30.
Okay, I'm gonna tell a story that may go too long, and so to any of my leaders like Joseph Wimbo or Jocelyn, tell me to just cut it short. So 1990, I had already accomplished what I wanted to do by the year 2000, which was living in a warm climate by the sea, teaching in a college or university, consulting on the side. So I was doing that. Didn't know where to go next. So I went to the beach to hang out with one of my friends, and I was doing a little meditation in the morning. And I literally had an experience where I saw someone, and I said to that someone, well, what's my mission? And someone said, Peace Corps in the lands of the rich and famous on the Pacific Rim. And I said, what on earth does that mean? And the voice said, well, there are people in the lands of the rich and famous who are rich and famous, but poor in spirit. And your first mission is to show them that they have options that will bring them peace and joy. Because we probably all know some people that are wealthy that are miserable, right? So they have options that will bring them peace and joy. And then the voice said, there are also people in the lands of the rich and famous who are neither rich nor famous. The poor, the uneducated, women in a man's world, strangers in a strange land. And your mission is to help them achieve their dreams by getting the rich and famous to share their wealth and power. This was certainly probably the most important experience that I've had in my whole life. So the little voice basically said, look, get rich people with a lot of money and power to help people who are less fortunate. And I've lived that mission from August of 1990 till now. So that's how it got started. Okay, let's see. Post-pandemic, shift to onshoring. Jitendra, I don't really believe that it makes sense to do a lot of onshoring because American workers are in many ways less educated, less literate, and more expensive, and I shouldn't say lazier, but less hardworking than people in a lot of other countries that we offshored to. So no matter what Donald Trump says, I don't think it's possible, and I don't think it's a good idea. I think there could be some bringing back manufacturing, but I think for the US to be successful, it has to continue to build relationships in awesome countries around the world that are innovating like crazy. And whether you're talking about India, Pakistan, China, Vietnam, Romania, Ukraine, and some countries not in America as well. There are all these amazing countries with awesome people that would make great partners. Okay, conflict with founders.
So maybe I can add a little bit more.
Yes,
to be the hardware guy. Tesla first started making the cars in California.
Mm-hmm.
Certain manufacturing can be done. It's better to be done here, but not everything. So you have to be selective and be wise about the cost efficiency. And also a lot of consumer good companies, they have factories in China, not to manufacture and ship it back here. They are actually selling into the local market. And they have actually their factories all over the world. Europe, because of the saving of the cost of transportation, right? And also any import-export taxes. So there are many considerations. So it's not simple as one stroke of the president say, hey, bring all the manufacturing back. That is going to happen overnight, because the outsourcing of the manufacturing, especially on the, because I grew up with PC, so many of the PC were done over 30 years. So the ecosystem, if you look at a lot, why Shenzhen? It's not even different parts of China, specifically around Shenzhen, very good at doing electronic devices. It's because they have a lot of local injection molding company that can turn around and mold in less than 24 hours, right? All the suppliers, the chip manufacturing company, the big TSMC chip manufacturer. So they already moved all their infrastructure over there. So immediately telling them to come back here, and also with the high labor rate. So some of these products will be super a lot more expensive. It's software-wise, I think, some of the software I see there's more work being coming back on shoring, especially I think with the time difference, depending where they outsource to. And also sometimes potentially for the language communication. So ended up a 15 minutes call, you have to spend 30 minutes. So even though on the what in the hardware side, a lot of times they have what they call bill of material costs, but
Yeah.
there's a lot of soft costs.
Yeah.
How much time you spend every night communicating with your supply in overseas to make sure that they got the product perfect and ship it correctly to you. Those are not factoring into the product material costs, but it's your engineering costs or your other related costs that, because whoever that resource that you allocate to do that task could be reallocated to do more value-added tasks.
Yes.
If they didn't have to do that.
Thanks, Joseph. That's a great series of insights about the different reasons that it makes much more sense to not only to keep resources outside the United States if they're there, but to add more resources globally. And I've been to Shenzhen a couple of times, and it's awesome, right? I mean, it's such an amazing place with such talented people. And I think even with software, the challenge I think we face in the United States is that there are so few people who are willing to, take mathematics and that sort of stuff in high school and then go to a rigorous college and, get a degree in computer science or electrical engineering. And so there are not enough people that are well enough trained to do the job well. And if we think about in Silicon Valley, a lot of the people that are software engineers were not born here, right? They were born in, many of them were born in Asia, a lot of them in South Asia, some in China.
Eastern European countries, Russia,
Yeah.
all over the world.
Right.
Hungary
Right.
actually produces a lot of great mathematicians, right?
Right.
So who are great in computer science.
Yeah, that's very true. Very true. So I hope we've answered Jitendra's question. Okay, let's see. Terry asked about conflict with founders. Do you have a sense of what are the common issues that spark conflict in the founder? Yeah. Is there an indicator measure success in business based on how early conflict occurs? So I don't think there's a metric, okay? To answer your second question first. When I think of the reasons that founders fight, one of them is over ownership. Probably more important than ownership is who gets to do what. And so, if you started out with 2 or 3 friends, then you haven't really figured out who's going to run the place and be the CEO and who's going to, and sometimes it's easy to figure out who the chief technology officer is. But let's say there may be 2 founders who are fighting over who gets to be the CEO. So roles and responsibilities is one thing. Ownership is a second. Third is occasionally, in terms of their global expansion strategy, where they want to go with the business and also how fast they want to grow, founders will sometimes break apart because they're either wanting to go in different directions geographically, or one of them wants to go out and let's get some venture capital and let's grow really fast and da-da-da. And another founder might say, no, I don't want to work 80-hour weeks, and I don't want outsiders to own the business. I want to grow at a more reasonable rate. And we can be a very wonderful $100 million company instead of being miserable founders of a $1 billion company. So there are those reasons. Occasionally, there is conflict because one of the founders winds up having an affair with one of the employees. And the other co-founders will typically, it doesn't always, sometimes they kick the founder out, but almost always they say you have to stop, one of you has to stop. Either stop having this little thing on the side or one of you leaves. So there's that. And occasionally a founder will be dishonest about something. So let's say you've got founders and somebody's responsible for a certain amount of bringing in sales revenue and so on. And they're saying, oh yeah, these contracts are about to happen, really good. The other founders count on that person. And then it turns out that he was making up a story, telling lies. So there can be issues of integrity. Almost never personality conflicts, right? You might think, oh, personality conflicts will do it. No, if founders learn to appreciate each other's personality and work together with that, that's an asset rather than a liability. There are no more written questions, so.
So I think that might be it. Thank you very much, Tom, for that very insightful webinar about finding co-founders and give us some more of your wisdom. So I think for us, it being a little bit, I would say, what they call us, because I think people try to be nice to me, they call us a Renaissance man. Rather than being old. So we've been going, I mean, personally, I think I personally experienced through 3 waves of startup waves, right? The PC wave, the .com wave, and then the cloud wave. So sometimes, things do repeat itself, and sometimes, different environment, different things, but but really appreciate you share so much insight, and then I think we already let everybody know that this video will be available, as well as your slide deck for anyone to download after this webinar. So thanks again for your great time and great presentation.
Well, Joseph, I want to thank you and Wimbo and Jocelyn for giving me the opportunity. I love the topic you picked. And as I said, I'm going to be able to use this slide deck in other places in the future. So what the attendees saw tonight was really a joint team product from the 4 of us. And
Yes.
it wouldn't have happened without all 3 of you giving me ideas and guidance and support all along the way. So I'm happy to do it. Siva has a question about cases where we resolve founder conflicts. And I don't have lots of, oh, I'm going to do an answer line. I don't have, so Siva, I don't have lots of, if you're still there, I don't have lots of concrete examples that I can share because they're under non-disclosure. But I think the key thing that I try to do is if 2 people are fighting, I try to find someone that both of them trust to kind of intermediate to see if we can reach a meeting of the minds. Another thing that's kind of crazy is some companies have mascots. So you may have a dog or a cat or a snake or a bird. And sometimes people who don't like each other both like the same animal. And so I've had some co-founders who fight, who wind up, taking turns taking care of the, let's say, the dog who's a mascot, and they realize that they're not as horrible as they thought each other was. But so besides those 2, I think the key thing is to drill down and say, why is a conflict there? Help us understand what's happening for you. And if you do that with both of them, you drill down below the surface stuff to find some things that neither of them was aware of on the surface, right? But if you just ask them, okay, why do you feel that way? Tell me more about why that's true. Tell me more about that. They will have mutual discovery about, oh, that's why you do that. That drives me crazy. And it's that helping them to become more aware of why they're in conflict helps them to solve the conflict, right? That they can do it themselves once you help them to understand what's going on.
Thank you so much, Tom, for your wonderful talk. Really enjoyed it. And thank you everyone for attending tonight's event. I hope that you all look forward to our next event and visit us on our website and meetup page.
Now, can I come to learn next time?
Absolutely.
Okay, I love it. Well, again, thank you all. And thanks to the audience for coming. It was a pure pleasure. Okay. Okay. Bye.
Thanks, everyone, and good night.
Thank you. Bye-bye.